I wouldn't do the Kickstarter again. But I mean, that's probably experience you have to have. From the very first hire, we actually implemented a process which takes time. But then at the very end, because for the first employees, you can't have too many people you're wrong with your thoughts on them. So if they don't perform as you desire, that will throw back your whole company. One of the main things we always do is so-called hospitation. So they stay in our company for 4 to 5 hours. On the one hand, doing some sample tasks, which allow us to see how good they are, but on the other hand, allow them to have a deeper insight of what the actual work is about. And then going to various people in our company to see how they work, do lunch with them and so on to just get to know them.
Bonjour, and welcome to Mission First, the podcast to get inspired and to learn from successful entrepreneurs who are building a sustainable future for our planet and its people. I am Gilles Toussaint, your host and the founder of GT Impact, a growth and digital marketing agency working only with companies making a positive difference in this world. Growing a company that aims at having a sustainable impact is not easy. That's why I created Mission First. In each episode, I interview one entrepreneur who has a sustainable mission and who has recently gone through the difficult first years successfully. Together, we discuss their challenges and what they have learned on the way. We go into detail with a specific focus on company culture, leadership, financing, growth, and business strategy. That way, you'll learn hands-on tips on how to build a better future and a successful company too. Today, my guest is Christoph Berger, the founder and CEO of Vilisto and Planet Sustainability. With Vilisto, he has developed a digital heat management system with self-learning radiator thermostats, which reduce CO2 emissions and heating costs by up to 32%. He has founded his company in 2014, directly after finishing his university degree in energy system. Since then, the company has now 21 full-time employees and they are currently raising their Series A funding round. They won the German Innovation Award 2020 for Climate and Environment. They are rated 4.7 out of 5 stars by their employees on Kununu, which is the German Glassdoor. So they have an extremely good reputation as an employer. We will focus this episode on learning from his experience on how to build the right team for a seed round. And we will also talk about his new online event that brings innovators and B2B startups together called Planet Sustainability. So if you are planning to raise seed funding with your startup, or if you are building and growing a Greentech company with a hardware and digital product in the B2B world, this episode is definitely for you. Christoph, thank you very much for being here today. How are you?
Hi, Gilles. I'm very good. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
That's my pleasure. Let's start at the beginning. Which person has inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
I wouldn't say it's a single person, but very many different things that come up to or are being added up to become the person I am and the entrepreneur I am. But if I would pick out a person, I'd say it's always Steve Jobs.
Very good reference. It's also one of the reason I actually left my job at the time, watching his famous speech. What's your personal mission on Earth?
You've already mentioned that my background is energy systems. So I've always been into optimizing things and using those skills for a better environment and climate. So I'm very good in using my skills in optimization in terms of heat, energy, thermodynamics, and so on. So I think it's always good if the people use their skills in the right sense. And for me, that's actually climate protection. And I think also my background is very vital to pursue that way, actually.
Crucial indeed. So you are the founder of Vilisto. Can you explain me in a few words what your company is doing and what what's your mission if it's different from yours?
So with Vilisto, we save companies and municipalities energy and CO2 emissions, as you said, sometimes up to 32%, with our automated heat management. We've noticed that office buildings and also schools and universities are nearly or very often heated 24/7 because room data is missing for the control of the building. So the building management might not know which temperatures or occupancies are in the room. So we've developed a radiator thermostat, which has a presence detection integrated. And based on those sensors, we can learn room behavior and control the heating based on the actual demand. So if you look into an office, it would be preheated before you come in the morning, kept to the desired temperature whenever you're there, and turned down, saving energy whenever you don't use the room.
Very curious about the technical part of that. You said they have a sensor to detect the presence, because I was actually wondering if you were using cameras for that, for example. Can you talk about what kind of sensors that you use for that?
Yeah, sure. So next to room climate sensors like temperature and humidity, we use 3 sensors for the occupancy detection, which is movement, so passive infrared, sound, and light. And based on those sensors, we take measurements every minute of the room and aggregate that data to learn behavior patterns. The idea behind that is basically that you don't need any external sensors to detect the occupancy, which would work very fine with a movement sensor. But as soon as something is standing in front of the radiator or the thermostat is directed sidewards or something, those sensors wouldn't work anymore. And thus, especially based on the sound sensor, you can get quite good data about those occupancies. That's actually how we do it.
Very, very smart. Can you tell me a bit about the numbers to understand at which stage you are right now? You told me you had like 21 employees, full-time employees. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we have another 11 students, I think, 11 or 12 students. So we're 32, 33 people currently, but full-time people actually 21, yes.
And in terms of revenue, what kind of revenue, like ballpark, are we looking at?
Yeah, we're still in the 6 digits. That would change next year, I guess.
Okay, let's hope for that. So talking about financing, how much have you raised so far in funding, more or less?
Yeah, a few million. So a bit more than 2.
Have you already broke even yet?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Good. So that gives us a good idea of where you are now and what you do. So you are basically you found product market fit and you are in the growth phase right now.
Yeah, so I'd say we're at the start of the growth phase. So we've built up some really good traction, built up the team. So we're ready to scale more, and that's where we're actually at right now. Yep.
Perfect. Tell me a bit about the first steps. So how does the story start? You're just out of college and you decide to start Vilisto, apparently. So how does that happen? What are your first steps?
It actually already started in university. So within my studies, in my master's, you had to do different projects, and one of them was related to using data to predict room temperatures in an unknown room, right? So if you look at buildings and if you build a new building, it's quite obvious you know all the parameters of the walls, of the windows, etc. But if you have existing buildings, those data usually doesn't exist. So or they're not accessible. So I was using algorithms to learn how the room will behave in a future of like 2 to 3 hours based on the weather forecast. And that was actually the initial step to think about, well, if I know how the room will behave, I can also influence how it's being heated in an efficient manner. And at that time, actually, I was studying in UC Berkeley as one of my abroad semesters. And the thermostat Nest was bought from Google, I think for 3.2 billion, right? And I was thinking about, okay, there's some music in that market. How does that look like in Europe? And we have different heating systems than in America, where most of it is HVAC, and we have those classical warm water radiators. And at the same time, a founding center or like helping students founding a company at our university founded itself. And we kind of got in touch with them, and they only had like a banner on the campus saying, "Do you have an idea? Come and talk to us." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I've got a lot of ideas. Let's see which they find most interesting." And they sent me to a hackathon from a large energy corporation, a utility, and we won a prize with not my core team now, but former times. So in 2014, it was just two friends of mine. But that brought me to looking for a team and applying for governmental funding. In Germany, we have that Exist fund, where you get some start money, let's say, and that worked out. So it is more of a many things happening after another leading me to actually founding the company. So based on a university project, but then in the end, through consultancy, which was available at a university, and a government state funding program.
But so you had the initial idea at the university, you work on it on this hackathon with friends, you said, and then you got this like grant options, and you come back to Germany. And do you start the company alone?
Oh yeah. So the ideas arose before and after my my studies abroad, but actually the hackathon and everything was here in Hamburg in Germany. And after that, I didn't found with the people I was with the hackathon on, but I was actually looking for other members, and one of them found at the university, and one of in my, let's say, second degree friends cycle. So we were 3 people founding. Actually, one of the founders left after half a year, and we were sourcing our third founder now, Christian, through a job vacancy. We were just sourcing for co-founders in the area of sales and business development.
Okay, so that, and you just put the ad on the regular like job portals.
Yeah, actually, yes. We had, I think, 46 applications or something.
And when you to find the second co-founder, not the third one, you said you went through your acquaintances or like word of mouth. How do you proceed? Do you how long did it take you to find that person? You just talk to all your friends, you call all of them, you post on Facebook?
No, it's a word of mouth thing, I'd say. So at least how it happened with us. It is a friend I've known for many years, but only as a friend of my friends, basically. And I was just talking to all my friends about the ideas I had, and which is probably the first way you go and talk to your first degree people and ask them about that idea you have. And at that point, it popped out that, I know Lasse, he's not really happy in his job right now, and he wants to move back to northern Germany because he was in Munich at that time. And he by incident had the right skills also to complement the team. So
And what was his background? Because the interesting thing is you started, I saw on LinkedIn, you were like more the founder and you're more the product developer, and then you turned to be the CEO. What was his background?
Correct. Yeah, so as my background is energy systems, his background was computer science, and Christian's background is behavioral economics. And I indeed actually moved from an initial product development and also using the algorithms and implementing the first version of it to more of the business development, financial, and recruiting part, or personal HR management. And we employed our very first employee, for example, is a PhD in control systems who overtook my parts in the technical terms then.
Okay. And did you already have the grant before you managed to attract your second co-founder, or did you get it or apply for it together?
Yeah, we actually had the grant already. We were running half a year with the grant already, and it's a 1-year program. So after half a year, we swapped one of the founders, which was a guy who came from the economics area as like a consultancy. So that's what his job was initially, and he went back to that job. So we had to switch the founders there. So we ended up with Lasse and Christian, which is a very good, let's say, highly complementary but very diverse founding team.
And that's a very, very interesting part here. You tell me if you can talk about it or not, but when you have to swap co-founders like that, how did you handle and manage all the equity shares and everything? Did you just like sell, like did the co-founder leaving just like sold his shares?
Yeah, so I'd say there's no other option. You wouldn't find investors if there's like dead shares or people with dead shares running around who don't add value to the company anymore. You basically, as soon as the company doesn't have any value yet, and we didn't even have an MVP by that. So it's such an early stage that if you then leave, you have to buy back everything. To be fair, in our case, you could have set up better terms at the very beginning to handle those events, which we handled manually now. But I would always set up proper terms between the founders of vesting and how long you have to be in the company to even get a single share.
Okay.
Like the investors do as well. Yeah.
So how would you proceed right now? What would be a typical case? Like, would you vest the equity shares on 1 year with a cliff, or would you make it progressive? What would be your ideal scenario right now if you started a company today?
Yeah, I mean the standard one we use and we used in the past, and I see also as a good one for starting off the company is like a 4 years vesting and at least 1 year cliff, maybe even 2 years cliff for the initial foundation.
Meaning then the people get the founders get a salary, but if they leave, if it happens to leave before 1 year, then they basically leave with nothing.
Correct.
Got it. So can you tell us a bit what you do when you are the three of you? What is the next big milestone?
The first milestone is actually to get somewhat of a product running and get a first customer with that. And as soon as that worked, actually to go to the next phase of building it further to a serial product you can produce in a mass, basically. That's like the product side. To be fair, at the very beginning, you can't think of a large team you want to grow or build up because you don't have the funds to do so.
And what was the hardest part until like this MVP or during this MVP phase?
I mean, the MVP probably has like 10%, not even 10% probably, of the functionality and the workability of the products you use for a larger scale. So the hardest part is probably the weekends and the nights you have to work to fix problems and work very closely with the customer because the very first one trying out a product which is not ready yet, of course, because it's just an MVP. They know that's an MVP, but still you have to get a good communication. You have to fix those problems soon, and especially in our area where you handle heat. So as soon as it's too warm or too cold, the people will complain. So it's not like you use the software and it just breaks down, but it's rather the comfort of the people, which you have to take care of then.
And what are the next steps after you found your first client? Is that client like trying the MVP still a client from you now?
Actually not, because we pivoted a bit. So the initial direction we went through also with the Kickstarter was a B2C approach, where many thermostats came into the B2C market around that time. And for our technology, we didn't have the right price point and the right value add because we didn't solve a specific problem in that market. Our very first customer was a housing association, so also a residential building. And after we noticed the Kickstarter campaign didn't work and there's a lot of hassle with the housing association in terms of installation, maintenance, and so on, but also the business model, who buys that, where's the investor, who's the user, you've got user-investor dilemmas and stuff. We pivoted to a purely B2B non-residential focus, so offices and municipalities. And that was basically one of the most important points we did actually to get that product to market fit, because we didn't have it before. And in that non-residential area, you have so-called free rider problems. So the people who work in those buildings, they use the energy, but they don't pay for it personally. And that's why they're not incentivized or responsible of turning down the heating, for example, when they leave. And that creates a huge savings potential, because you can optimize or automate that process of turning the heat up and down.
And before we dig into that B2B pivot, can you talk a bit about the Kickstarter part, like the Kickstarter itself? So you said that you realized that you didn't have the right fit, not the right price. But is there something else you've learned from that Kickstarter? So you were claiming you were pledging for 120,000 euros or dollars, and you got around 12,000 euro. So what have you learned from that Kickstarter? What would you do differently if you would start again now?
I wouldn't do the Kickstarter again. But I mean, that's probably experience you have to have. We were very inexperienced. I mean, I was directly from university, and the other two had 2 years of work experience. But none of us had done a Kickstarter campaign or whatsoever. So using methodologies to get your focus, get your product to market fit, and so on. We didn't set a focus on that at the very beginning, I'd say. And that's why even at the start of the Kickstarter campaign, we were able to see that this won't probably work. So already then we were thinking about switching and evaluating the market segments in a very strategic way, which helped out very lot. But the Kickstarter campaign itself was good design, was good, but we weren't solving a problem for the market we were addressing. So there wasn't really the chance of actually the campaign to work out.
Okay, and so you switch after more or less this at the same time, or after this Kickstarter campaign, you pivot to a more B2B system where you realize there is a real need for the client. At the time, are you still? At what time do you start to have to raise some more funding or to find another grant?
We already found the first investors after half a year running in the grant, and they invested at the end of the grant period, which is InnoEnergy. It's like a very, very large European EU funded Greentech early stage investor. Mm-hmm. And they joined us end of 2016, and we then even did another business angel round in summer 2017. So more and more funding rounds coming up to that. So we've done 4 until now. And it's roughly every 18 months.
Yeah, and that was every time enough to keep you going and for the next phase. So when you develop when you switch to B2B, how do you find your first client?
Actually, the very first one was, I wouldn't say coincidence, but we were actually exhibiting at the Startup Con in Cologne, so a startup fair. And just going out public with our offerings and our solution. And it was that moment, and that's probably a good advice for all other startups and founders, which are still very early. If you are on a fair, stay to the very, very end, right? You might notice the startups or the people leaving like 10 minutes before it's over. I've already going away, leaving because there's nobody coming. And that was our first customer who came after the closure of the fair and said, wait, that's interesting. And he saw the potential and said, okay, I'm going to try that. And that was our first customer. And that was very, very important because you get your first reference, the first logo on your homepage or whatever to address new customers and say, well, I've already got one. You're the next. You're still in a very thin area of like innovators you're addressing, because the early adopters, they still wouldn't go for your solution because you don't have any references. But it was just it's a startup fair, and leaving to the very staying until the very end to get the one person that is still scouting, to get that as a customer.
That's a very good tip. I think it's part of like these conferences, as well as like, for example, of being part of the drinks, and not going home after directly at at 5 when the official fair is over. Sometimes also can really help to build your network at the time. So the first client was sometime in 2017. What happened? What are the next like big milestones until now?
So that first customer still had the MVP solution. So we didn't do like a one-time MVP, but we produced 150 devices actually. And the next milestone was, of course, to continue developing the system to a standard where we're able to produce more than 150 devices, and also for a price which is not double as much as I can generate revenues from, which, if you do very manual MVPs, they're just too expensive. That took us roughly 12 months. So by the end of 2017, we had a product which can be produced by the, let's say, 100, 200,000 or something. That was one milestone, but also, of course, onboarding new investors like business angels to also get expertise into the company, of founders who've already exited the companies, who've managed funds, do restructurings, and so on. So that was very important. And also getting, we didn't really have first employees by then. I think they were by the end of 2017. But, working with students, interns, to get some feeling and get your head into working with more people than just as founders who by then knew each other very well.
How do you find these interns, by the way? Because I'm actually looking for some intern and some partners to work with me now. So I'm curious, how do you find them then?
There are different ways. I mean, on the one hand, it's always about network. So we have a very, very good network to the university. So most of the students and interns we have and had are technical guys or girls. And because myself, but also other employees here who studied or did their PhD at our university have very good connections to the institutes. And also my friends, I'd say half of my friends are actually doing their PhD at university or did and are a postdoc now. So you have a broad network into that area. But on the other hand, actually use the official channels of posting vacancies. So for the universities, for example, Hamburg, but also other cities, they have the Studierendenwerk. And through that, you can post job inquiries, and then you get, it depends on your topic, you get good or loads of applications actually. For working students more than for interns, to be fair. So we actually within the time we've building up that company, we've tried out various platforms to source for people, and currently then only focus on the ones which are valuable for that specific region I'm looking for and where I get traffic. So we've got good experiences in that.
So do you mean here platforms beside the university, your network, job portals, you mean, in that case?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I would always put any job open jobs to Indeed, for example, right? Because it's on the one hand for free, they've got good Google reach. I would use the university if I want to go for students. Sometimes it actually, not in the times now with COVID, but before that, it's very good to use the blackboards to just pin your job description. The students walk by. That works pretty well.
And you first have a lot of interns to help you work on the product. You get the product ready to be produced at scale. is there anything you can share about the business models you've considered or went through, and or some learnings about pricing that you can share with our audience?
Yes, I mean, we were always right from the start thinking about different business models to work with. And we were always in the situation of deciding for the one or the other because there are different influential factors. So our first business model is actually selling the devices as hardware and putting a small service fee on top to have a contract with the customer for a longer time. But you don't really get much recurring revenues out of it. For us as a hardware company, it was always important to generate a lot of cash at the beginning, because otherwise we would have to secure that as funding, which is very expensive in equity. Right from the start, we were thinking about, for example, performance contracting, because we were talking to a lot of utilities and energy service providers. And performance contracting is basically a way to implement your technology for free, and then you participate on the savings you generate. Right? So the better you perform, the more money you earn, but also the more the customer saves, which are very attractive models, but you need a lot of cash for that, actually. So those are sometimes models which can't be implemented at the very beginning. Also, for example, a renting model. We implemented that this year, and you need to have financing partners for that. But let's say if you want to do leasing or renting of your devices, those partners need a specific minimum volume of money you earn or revenues you generate so that they find it attractive at all. So it is always a question of in which stage you are at and how much revenue and how many customers you have. So we're thinking about those models at the very early beginning, but weren't able to implement them right from the start because we either didn't have the cash or the volume or so on. Yeah.
And now what's the final a business model that you have right now?
So we're offering mainly two models. The one is actually the same as before. We're selling the hardware and having a service contract on top, which is very relevant for every owner-occupier. So companies or municipalities owning their buildings and using them themselves, and they want to keep most of the savings to themselves. For companies and municipalities who don't have that much cash, so they can't invest, and also for tenants of buildings, we're offering a renting model, which orientates itself by the amount of heat cost you have as of today. So we'll take a portion of the money you pay on your heating bill today, which is nearly an energy contracting, but it's not based on the real performance, but actually just on the past data you had.
Okay, so now that you're talking about passing the step with all the interns, you arrive at a time where you need to hire your first employees, and I think there was something very interesting that we wanted to talk about in terms of you sent me the do's and don'ts about how to build the right team for a seed round. When you mean the seed round here, you mean all the different small business angels rounds that you've made?
Yeah, I would say we've done a pre-seed, a seed, a post-seed, and a pre-series A round.
Okay.
It's hard for, let's say, inexperienced founders also then developing a hardware product, which is very capital intensive, to raise huge amounts of funds for a good valuation at the beginning. So you do a few rounds, which is not my recommendation, but in our case, there wasn't really a better chance to get more money for good conditions.
What would you do when you said it wouldn't be a recommendation? What would be a recommendation now?
I mean, a recommendation is always to get as much money as you can get, but it still has to, of course, be balanced with how much equity you give away. So, I mean, the government grant we got at the beginning is just 120 euros, which is very limited if you want to pay salaries which are very low, but on the other hand, still have to develop hardware, buy stuff, and all of that. So that money is running out very fast. And if you don't have any customer until then, because you just have an MVP, for example, and it's just like a tryout or whatever, it's hard to get big chunks of money if you don't prove, at least as a founder, you're a serial entrepreneur and you know what you're doing. So as a first-time founder, that's always a bit harder, I guess.
So every time you do this like investment round, you dilute a little bit the company and your shares. Can I ask you how, like, for example, right now, in terms of like the founders themselves, the founder bubble, the three of you, how much equity shares do you still have compared to the investors in total?
Yeah, I mean, you can always look in the Handelsregister, so that's not really a secret. The founders are roughly at 50% of the company.
Okay, so for a B2B, even capital-intensive company like that, that's roughly normal.
No, I would say it would be normal, like after your Series A, to have a good majority in the company, which we won't have, but yeah.
Talking about now how to build the right team for all these seed rounds, because it's something that you can obviously bring a lot on that topic for our audience. You sent me a few do's and don'ts, so let's go through them and discuss them. The first do you sent me was take your time for a good and professional recruitment process. Can you iterate on that?
Yeah, definitely. We're very lucky with one of our investors, InnoEnergy, who are not only supporting you with money and advice, but also, for example, hosting workshops for free, which is, for example, a recruitment workshop, let's say. I actually did one with them, which was like 2 days. And it gave me a very good insight of how to structure the way to recruit people, and also to onboard them in the company, and also to know who you're actually looking for. Based on the applicants we had in the past, we get a lot of feedback in terms of, wow, that's so different than in other companies. I've never talked to the management before. I've never talked to those. I never had an exercise or whatever. So yeah, I can tell you also a bit more how we structure that. But from the very first hire, we actually implemented a process which takes time. But then at the very end, because for the first employees, you can't have too many people you're wrong with your thoughts on them. So if they don't perform as you desire, that will throw back your whole company, because it's like 25 or 20% of your company staff, right? So you have to be quite sure with those people. So one of the main things we always do is so-called hospitation. So they stay in our company for 4 to 5 hours. On the one hand, doing some sample tasks, which allow us to see how good they are, but on the other hand, allow them to have a deeper insight of what the actual work is about. And then going to various people in our company to see how they work, do lunch with them and so on, to just get to know them. And for example, the very first step in our recruitment process is a 10-minute call. And most of the people say, oh, how should I, within 10 minutes explain myself and so on. But we have a very structured and efficient process for both sides, actually, to get an idea if that could work or not. And then we'll always do a round table in our team, basically, to see if we want to go to the next phase or not. And we've done that right from the beginning. But to be fair, actually, one of our first employees was someone I knew many years before. And he was working in a different startup, which didn't run very well. So, we basically just hired him off there.
And so can you detail a bit what are these different steps in the process? So you start with, of course, you receive applications, you post on different job portals, university network, you filter the first CVs, you have your first 10-minute call, which is, I guess, just to get to know the person and see if that person is not a psychopath or if it would fit to the team, I guess. And what are the next steps?
Yeah, so, I mean, as soon as the people apply, they definitely get a direct response of that we're going to look at the application as soon as possible. And as soon as we are in an actual recruitment process, so looking for people and not getting inbound applications, we are quite fast on that because we've built up a Kanban system of tickets where you just, monitor all applications. Because when employing very many people at the start of this year, we had like 650 applications or something. So that's like a lot of work to do, and you have to keep track on that, right? So the very first part is a telephone call, which is not only to get to know the people and definitely not the final say about if it fits to the company or the culture, because we would always have to get to know the people in person for that. So the very first step is to, on the one hand, get the facts like salary, when could you begin, etc., but also questioning about their motivation. Like why would they want to change their company? Why would they come to us? What's interesting for them? Explaining a bit what the job is about and hearing from them what they see as their skills and not, to get a broad overview basically of what they bring. And always with the idea that also the applicant knows more about the company and about the job to decide themselves if they want to keep in that loop or not. Because from many companies, I always see that, the applicants get asked questions, but they can't ask questions, which I don't really find fair. So the second step then, if we say, well, that's a good candidate, we meet them for 30 to maximum 60 minutes in person, or nowadays rather in a video conference. Mm-hmm. And also depends on where they are, right? If the people are close by, they would come around. If they are in different countries, we would do a video call. And that's basically the first insight of 2 to 3 team members getting to know the person in quasi person, right? If it's video, it's not as they sit in front of you, but you see them, you see how they behave, and it's more about sometimes asking similar questions again, but also just getting an impression of that person. And the very last and final step is basically to do that hospitation I mentioned before. So 4 to 5 hours. Running through our business. To be fair, within that process, for every position we have, maximum 3 to 4 people do that hospitation, because that's huge effort. So you have to be very sure after the second phase already. 50% get a no after the telephone call, roughly.
So 50% after the 10-minute call.
Yeah. I would say probably 50% don't even get a call. Right, but the 50% having a call, resulting 25% go to the next step, and then only 3 to 4 persons go to the hospitation.
Yes. And what kind of tasks, for example, do you ask them to do when you said sample tasks?
We try to make up the tasks the same way they would be in their job, and or actually take actual tasks from the job. So, because, setting up sample tasks is like, letting them do work they would never do. So we try to actually pick out topics which are enclosed, which you can handle within half or 1 hour, and see how you approach those topics. For example, if you look for somebody who's doing office management, they get loads of files, for example, of invoices or whatever, or emails which come into the info at mailbox or whatever, and let them sort and see how and if they can already see what kind of question that is or what kind of document it is and how you would handle it. So it is actually the real tasks you would do. And let's say for programming, that is programming tasks, sometimes as tasks or sometimes as you get a sheet of paper and you explain what the code actually will execute and where the pitfalls are.
So that's the moment, for example, let's take a software developer. That would be the moment at which you start testing his hard skills, hard coding skills.
Yeah, some especially for the coders, it's already in the second step where we do some samples to get an idea of how familiar they are with the topic.
Have you created your own like test for that? For example, right now I'm testing for a client of mine. I'm working and like helping them with recruiting, and I'm testing. I'm using Test Dome, which is an online platform where actually mostly done for to test coding skills, where you can select, for example, you take a full stack developers and then you have custom tests that you can select, and then automatically they rate the coder based on their results. Are you using these kinds of like platforms, or have you created your own tests?
We've created our own tests. We don't use the platforms, let's say, yet. I guess it'll depend on the size. Sometimes it depends on the area, but in very many areas of people we're sourcing, the hardcore skills are sometimes not the most important factor. So those coding tests will always integrate a barrier in your recruitment process. It will make it longer, or it will make it very unpersonal to some people. Some are used to it, some are not, and we're not at that point where we use that automated tests yet. So we try to make real examples from the work we do.
Mm-hmm. And do they do the tests for, like by themselves, or do they sit next to someone when watching them what they're doing with the real examples?
It depends on the test. So if it's just let's say explain what the code is about, it's of course with us. If it's a coding example to build something, it's on their own. But then you always get a review session of explaining how you approach that topic, and also get a feedback on how good the result is, what you've delivered.
Okay. So I think it's a good time, because I have plenty of questions, but I think they might be answered within the next do's and don'ts. So the first one was take your time for a good and professional recruitment process, which you explained very well how extensive your recruitment process is, and I also agree that it's the key to have the right employees. The second one is implement processes to enable fast responses to applicants.
Yeah. So when I said take your time at the first point, it doesn't mean that it should take like weeks until the applicants get answers. So I've noticed that if you are fast and your process is fast, so that the applicants get responses very fast, on the one hand, you save energy and money because you are fast in recruiting. And on the other hand, you are way ahead of a standard company or corporation where the process just takes for ages. From my time, I still know that, applying and then 6 months later they say, oh yeah, we would like to invite you. That's like a no-go. So if they apply, they should get the response straight away. And if you manage to get to the first step, you should have a phone call within the next week, best case, right? So to keep them in the process. And then we did hires in 4 weeks. If we have working students, that's sometimes 1 or 2 weeks. So when they do the hospitation part, to be fair, for interns and working students, the second step is our hospitation, because there's just we don't put in too much time with that, because it's not a full-time employee. But we decide right after that, and sometimes they start next day. So and that's highly appreciated by the people, because they don't wait for ages, because there's so many possibilities out of there. Worst case, other companies are faster, and then you have to start the whole recruitment process again.
And how do you have some kind of automated processes? Because you said you have a Kanban system, but when you said you had 650 applications, for example, for one job, it means like going through the CVs, if you take 50% of that, that's 325 people. Do you reply personally to these 325 people?
So no. So on the one hand, those 650 applicants were through, I think, 20 positions we had open, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that we try to automate as much as possible. If it's not automizable, we created layouts, right? So for when your application enters, you directly get a response automated. But as soon as one of the HR employees who's a working student is putting up a ticket and reviewing, they do get the template answer, we're currently actually reviewing, we'll get back to you within the next 2 days or something. So that is a semi-manual process. If you talk about like having all those phone calls, you do have to use tools like Calendly or whatever to get the dates straight and get your appointments right without chatting forth and back. So that has to be automated.
Yeah, Calendly is fantastic for that. Are you using any other like tools than Calendly, like Personio or like these recruitment softwares?
So many things, especially in the development team, we're using Jira for. So Atlassian Jira, which is very famous in development topics. We use that for the talent management process as well. But we're going to change to our CRM in the future. So we're using Zoho as a CRM, and that can also do things like recruitment processes, but also talent management when they're already onboarded in their company. A bit like some other softwares which are out of there who specifically only concentrate on that topic.
Okay. The third do that you sent me was source a diverse team. Can you explain me?
Yes. So diverse is not only different ages, different nationalities, different cultures, and of course different genders. But there's more to it. So maybe talking about the genders in the first place, we were 3 guys starting the company. The first employees were guys. It was super hard to get the first girls into the team. Now we managed to get loads of girls in the technical team, in the business development, in sales, in the students. So that's really good. But that was a hassle. So don't wait too long to employ a diverse gender field in your team, basically. But what I'm meaning with source a diverse team is basically look for different characters. So the humans usually tend to be surrounded with people that are alike to yourself, and that in the long run doesn't work really good. So you will always have people thinking the same way and not having any innovation in your company. So try to be open to employ people who think totally different to you. Of course they have to have skills, they have to fit into your team in general, but so what we are using is basically there are different ways to assign roles to different people. We're using a system called, I think, the team management system or something. So you have 8 different roles which can be directed to the inside of your company or to the outside, for example, to customers, etc. And you can be a developer, you can be a controller, you can be an innovator, and so on. And it's like a very short test we do. It's only 4 crosses in an Excel file you have to do, and you get a direction of what type of people those people are. And if you do that strategically and look at this map, you'll notice that, of course, many of the people in a very early stage are a very similar type. For example, an organizer, because they have to be all-rounders doing everything, and they are not the specialists yet. But growing your company, you will notice that it makes sense to, for example, have a controller, but on the other hand, opposite, have an innovator in your company. So the one is always bringing new ideas, and the other one is challenging it. That's very crucial to have an innovative culture, but also have different opinions in your company, because they will always make better decisions in the end in your team.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if you manage to have these people who are very different but identify themselves to the company's vision and mission, then they can, even if they might be very different, they can work together very well and come up with a better solution.
Yeah, but to be fair, that's my fourth point, right? So my fourth point was employ people who strongly identify with the company's vision and mission. So what we've noticed, I mean, the question is why would people work in a startup where you get usually, let's say, at least a bit less salary, and you work more, right? But it is a job you have to identify with, and also with the mission behind, or the vision behind the company and the people working in that company. And if we have two people at the same level, all exactly the same, we will always choose the one who tends to have more identification with our vision, because that will be the long-term anchor in the company. So they might have different incentives and motives and motivations as of today because of their, let's say, their standard of living in terms of salary, their location, and so on. But that might change in the future. But their identification to a vision of a company wouldn't change that fast. So if you want to keep those people for a long time, don't look for people who just want to do their job, but who want to do the job for the vision and mission you're pursuing.
But how do you identify the people to make sure that they identify themselves to the company's vision?
I'd say it's sometimes simpler than you might think. We just ask. So even in the very first step of recruitment, so the phone call, we ask the question, what are your main motives or motivations or motivators? So we will always, in every step, we'll ask them, why would they want to work for us? What is driving them? Why exactly us, right? So, and you will always notice that they will always, interact with you the way that explaining around that topic gives you a sense of, do they actually burn for the same thing, or are they just looking for a job, right? And yeah, I would just ask. I mean, even if you don't ask an indirect question, you can also ask, okay, what is driving you? Can you identify with our vision? If they say yes, that's an easy answer, right? But you would always have to dig deeper, and then why and how do you link that to your life, for example? How do you behave in different situations? So you would, in those talks, you would always ask for behavioral situations. So you never ask yes or no questions, but you ask. So I would, for example, Jill, I would ask you, can you name an example where you, let's say, you're doing a party and you want to invite people? How do you select those people, right? And you will explain me how you do that. And I asked you about specific situations, like how have you done that in this situation and in this situation? So that it's always situative, and you would have to explain. And this is also the same thing for your values drivers, and also for the vision you're pursuing. And it's about just asking a lot of questions and getting a feeling of why do they go the way they do.
And it's also a lot about the following question, isn't it? Like I call it the follow-up question, because usually I think it's very important, as you said, to ask directly, for which reason do you want to work for us? And, like, I had an interview today with a candidate who told me, like, oh, I'm just looking for a new job to get a visa for Europe. So yeah. And when you ask him, like, for example, can you explain me a bit what the company is doing? And he tells me, like, well, I don't know. Like, I know you are, I'm not going to say what, because I don't want to talk about my client, but when he cannot explain anything about the company, it's already a sign for me that if he is just coming and looking for a job for the money, and what we say, if he comes for the money, they will leave at some point for the money as well. So I think I really agree with you that it's very important to identify yourself with the company's vision as an employee. And I think the follow-up question and the indirect question are very important. Like sometimes what I've noticed is after asking this, why do you want to work with us? They give you an answer. And usually if they are fair or if they are honest with that answer, it will come back during the rest of the interview, the time you spend with them. If people, like when I was interviewing for my previous company in the music industry, lots of people will tell you, like, oh, because I want to work, I love music. But then if you dig a bit deeper, not directly after that question, but with different questions, you will ask them, "Oh, what was the last concert you went to?" And then they will tell you like the 10 different concerts they went to, or the 10 different albums they've listened to recently. And that usually tells you more, I think, about the people's motivation. It's basically what you just explained. It's putting them in different situations and seeing how they react in these situations.
Yeah, it is actually key for every recruitment process or every talk you should you do with those applicants. That is the way how to identify if it fits or not. And also, just on a personal level, you can rather identify with situations and decisions they take rather than a yes or no answer to see if that there's a harmony between you or not, for example.
Yes, and have you also noticed that mirroring works pretty well? In that case, when somebody tells you like, "Oh, I really love music," and if you say, "Oh, you love music," and if you do that a couple of times, they will just keep on digging further, and you will see how honest they are with the answers.
Yeah, true.
So that brings me to the next do's and don'ts, which is this time a don't. You said don't employ people if any one of the core team has a bad feeling about it. I love that one.
Yeah, we actually have a rule that everyone can have a veto. So not the full 30 people in our team, because that would make the process just too big and too large. But within the talent management, let's say execution team, we are 5 people, maybe 6 sometimes, and especially the founders, but also the other ones, if they have like a weird gut feeling, we don't employ, because and that brought us to where we are. I think, as I said at the beginning, the founding team is very diverse, but thus very complementary. We all look at people differently. We are all different, and based on that, we make up our minds in a different way. And it turned out that when we actually employed people where we said, well, this might be weird, they actually left again quite early, due to us or due to them. The gut feeling is sometimes way better than you think.
Is it something you do with like no question asked? If somebody says, "Sorry, I don't feel like hiring that person, I have bad feeling," you don't ask any question. You say, "Okay, fine."
I mean, you would always want to try to let the person explain, right? How did this come up? And we'll always mirror that and say, well, I've seen that situation, that and that context, and not this one you've noticed, to see how strong that feeling is or not. But generally, within the process, we have different touch points in the team and also that talent management team, and they have seen a lot from that person, from the CV to the hospitation and so on. And at the very end, we say, okay, will we employ or not? And somebody in that round says, I have a weird feeling about this, then we don't employ that person.
Mm-hmm. Does it mean that you always see every candidate? I mean, the core management team, you are like 30 people now. Does it mean that even for any role in your company right now, they always end up meeting the management team?
Not necessarily all interns or working students, but full-time positions, yes.
Mm-hmm. And the last don't you told me was don't only employ people who aren't better than yourself.
Yeah, I try to do don'ts while it's rather a do.
Yeah.
So I mean, so right. I think it was Mark Zuckerberg saying, "Well, always employ people who are better than you or yourself," which I like the idea about. So I try to frame it as a don't. That don't only, in brackets, employ people who aren't better than yourself. In terms of there are different types of jobs where it doesn't make sense to necessarily employ people who are better than you. Take an example. You have a PhD and you want to employ people who build your hardware product. They don't necessarily have to be better in terms of knowledge, for example, but they, in that terms, they might have better skills in that specific area than yourself. And if you take that as your mantra, try to look for people who have skills which you don't have, right? So I'd say it's very bad if you think in a way that I'll employ that person because I know more than he does or she does, and that's why I can, let's say, control that person. And that's not that might have been in the past in a, let's say, traditional company or traditional hiring way, but the modern world is different. You want to empower the people, and you want to see that those people have better skills, and you want to develop those skills, and just reflect on yourself and feedback within your team if that person actually has skills you don't have. And that's correlating or highly correlating with the do we had before, considering source a diverse team. Because through that, you will most probably always have people who are better in some aspects than you are yourself.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And I can see the influence of Steve Jobs here, because I think it's him who said that you should hire people not to tell them what to do, but for them to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for all these tips and advice. It's very, very useful, and I could talk for hours about it, but let's not make this episode too long. Let's talk a bit now about your next baby, let's say. You started a company, or I don't know if it's a company yet, you're going to explain us, but you founded an event called Planet Sustainability that people can find on planetsustainability.de. Sorry, German and English here. So can you tell us a bit more about what this is?
Yeah, so I have to tell you the story about it to see where it ends up. Basically, to say what it is an online B2B event for finding and offering sustainable business solutions. So as we are a B2B company, we in our values, in our vision, sustainability is a very deep anchor. And most of our sales is done through direct sales in our company. So we're looking for large key accounts with huge real estate portfolios to generate impact. And when in March, COVID entered the world, or at least Germany in March, in some countries earlier than that, direct acquisition channels went down because the people had other concerns. So we had to refocus and also look for other channels, and especially for pre-qualifying customer leads. So that if you call them, they don't give you the answer, or come on, you don't have better things to do than that. Because, let's take a public administration where those people have to work in home offices, but they don't have laptops. They have different concerns at that time. It took maybe eight weeks to get them running again. And we were looking for let's say an online fair, as you would exhibit on a normal fair. And an audience would come, which is rather pre-qualified because they're interested in that topic. We wanted to exhibit on an online fair for sustainability. Now, what we've noticed, though, is that within the market, the analog, so offline fairs, tried to go online, but they kept the same concept, which doesn't work because online things are working differently. How you approach people, how you talk to people, how you exchange ideas, etc. So that didn't really work out. And also for the sustainability space, there wasn't any fair out there. For looking at sustainability, there were conferences, panels, etc. So all things where you can strengthen your brand if you are a speaker, but you can't do sales because those formats are a one-to-N talk, right? So you have your panel, and 300 people are listening, but you don't have access to their contact details. You don't know who they are. They don't interact. So when all the state funding programs came up to rescue the economy and also the startups, they were very important, but it took a while until money is being spent, and we were always on the side that those programs are very good, but for a startup, it's always even better if you allow them to have more sales channels, because if you generate good sales within that time, you will have higher chances to get better funding afterwards then. So that was the idea. And because we didn't find that specific niche of event, we said, okay, we're going to found that ourselves. It's actually not a company. It's just a brand of Vilisto currently, because you don't want to, put a legal entity in it if you don't know where it ends up next year, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, we initiated Plant Sustainability as self-help for the startups. So the startups don't have to pay. If I talk to fairs who are trying to go digital, the companies have to pay still 3,000 euros to get a virtual 3D booth. I'm like, okay, really? I mean, that's it's a digital event. Why would I need a 3D booth? It doesn't really make sense to me. The other formats are more interesting. So the startups only pay very little fee, and they get it actually back when they bring their network. So if they bring customers, for example, because those are pre-qualified people who might be interested in all other 99 solutions available on the platform. And it is like a one-day event where the startups basically exhibit, and innovators who are CEOs, innovation managers, climate sustainability managers, CSR, and so on, come and scout for solutions.
And how is that scouting happening? I'm curious, because as you said, you want to make it different than the typical online events. So how is that working?
Yeah, so we're using a platform which is a startup in Berlin called Talk, and they are experts in matching people. So as soon as you enter the platform, you will see every participant, and you will, because of the onboarding you do, which is done through specific questions of what your interest is and what you're looking for, but also, for example, what your hobby is, you will be matched on a global scale to all other participants in the event. So even entering the event and just being there for 1 hour and not all day will give you the value add to have multiple contacts. You see which fit well to your interests and your needs, and you can talk to them. Within the platform, you can always directly chat, directly go one-on-one calls, and there's also like a Calendly integrated in there, so you can manage to have appointments to them and so on. And the startup will have a specific profile where you can upload videos, documents, etc. So the people can just inform themselves, and then you will have up to 5 or 6 people from the startup on the platform you can directly talk to over that profile. And based on that setting, other formats are integrated. For example, is speed networking. I mean, we all know speed dating, speed networking, right? But it is using the same global optimization to match the right people. We'll do that 3 times over the day. Over like 30 minutes, you will meet 6 people, each 5 minutes. And it's all meant to bring the right people together without, browsing through the participants list and don't know what they're interested in and so on. So it's a lot through matchmakings.
Okay, so it's going to be a very good event to network and to between startups and all these decision makers who are looking for sustainable products and companies.
Right. Yeah.
And I will ask you the link to the Talk app or company, because I can't find it online. I will ask you the link after, and I will add it to the resources of this episode.
What
will be a measure of success for you in 1 year with that event?
if it happens again and is at least 3 times bigger than the first time.
But so what is a success for the first time? Which, like, how big should it be?
So we already have 100 startups online, and based on the people joining from the startups, there are already 300 people from the startups. We have additionally, I think 8 to 10 speakers, sponsors and partners who are on the platform. But then to get a good matchmaking to those 300 people, you of course need at least 300 other people, right? So we are aiming for 1,000 people on the platform in the end. We have 1 week to go. There's still loads of work to do, but also for everyone listening who's interested in sustainable solutions, that's a really good way to just get to know 100 different solutions from all areas, right? There's mobility, there's energy, there's agriculture, there's plastics, and so on and so on. So very broad scale of solutions. And for us, it's a success if the startups and the people who are looking for solutions say they found good business contacts. And as a startup, I would always think about how much time do I invest over that day and what's my customer acquisition cost. So how many customers would I have to actually get through that event? If that works out to have a better customer acquisition cost than your, for example, direct call approach, that's definitely a success.
Good. I would actually love to talk about customer acquisition and growth, but I think this episode is going to be way too long. Then I'd be happy to re-invite you probably in 1 year or 2 years to discuss as well your growth strategy for Vilisto, and probably with Planet Sustainability if it's still there in 3 years, which I hope.
Yeah, sounds good.
Let's finish by all the traditional questions that I ask my guests. So what's the best advice you've been given as an entrepreneur?
Stick to your ideas. I mean, keep going. You would always have to verify and get feedback, but especially at the beginning, there will be many people say, well, that's not the right way to go, or that's a bad idea, for example, because they're just not thinking the way you are and having the vision maybe. So don't let you stop from them. Keep going as soon as it's reasonable. If you get like those hints of, yeah, that could be a thing.
And how do you, at the other extreme, how do you know that actually you need to change your idea?
Keep an eye on the results. I mean, to take our Kickstarter campaign, that is a result where you know, okay, that flopped, that didn't work, that doesn't seem to be the right direction, or we are really bad in doing things, but we weren't. So, I mean, we get those advices from our shareholders, but also from if they haven't been shareholders before or before they were shareholders, from our advisors to direct you in a way. The best advice or the best guidance is always the customer, I'd say. So if they say, I need that, that's cool. That's a good advice. If everybody says, oh, that's a dumb idea, nobody needs that. Either you're asking the wrong people because it's not your target group, or actually nobody needs that.
What's your favorite question to ask candidates during your recruiting process?
A very good one. The question is, if we don't accept your application, why didn't we?
That's a really good one. First time I hear it.
Yeah, it's a super good one for self-reflection. And to be fair, you actually, I'd say 90% you get that answer which you had the feeling about before.
And okay, yeah, so so very interesting. So people where you have some doubts about, they would probably tell you about that doubt if that goes well. But for the people that you end up hiring, what did they tell you?
Usually they actually tell you if they have the same feeling about the talks you have, that's already a good thing, right? So if they think it is a very different point than you might think, then you didn't talk to another quite good, right? So usually they answer the question in a way that they know what their weakness is. Let's say if you have a sales guy, they would, most of them would say, oh, they're around. I can't think of any reason, which is always a really bad answer because there are always reasons to say no. But it is a common thing for, of course, sales guys to be good in selling themselves. So they don't find any reasons. But I can't remember all of them. But I'd say probably one of the sales people we hired said, well, maybe you say no because I'm not too experienced enough yet, which is a thing you can work on, right? So if you talk about technical stuff, then it is rather the case that they say, well, maybe I don't have the right skill set, and that will be the thing. Sometimes it's also very interesting that the people tell you, maybe our chemistry didn't fit together. And that's only on the phone call, like the first thing. And I'm like, yeah, it's somehow true. So, which is super weird, but yeah, it's a really good question. And actually most of the people say, oh, that's a really good question. Never heard that before. So they really have to think about it. And that's good.
That's a fantastic question. Yeah. Thank you. Which book would you recommend entrepreneurs like you to read?
That's a really hard question for me because I don't really read a lot of books. I'm more of I have to experience things and try things out. I think one of my skills is actually to identify many things and get the knowledge at the point where I need it. Right? For example, I've read a really good book, which is Der Fisch stinkt vom Kopf. So the fish stinks from the head. So basically management theory that if the team doesn't work, it's always the manager who's fucking up and not the people. Which is about how to motivate people, how to interact with them, how to speak on different levels with them, and so on. It's a really good book based on a fish seller on the Hamburg fish market. So it's recommendable, definitely. But I would say in general, I'm not the fan of reading multiple books and then knowing how to do it. As an entrepreneur, I think the skill set a good entrepreneur always has is you do things. You don't just read about it, you do things. So that's why, yeah, I can't really recommend many books because I haven't read many.
And is that the same, for example, regarding like trainings, podcasts, blogs, or influencers you would recommend for entrepreneurs and other people growing a startup like yours? Do you have any of these in mind that you could recommend?
To be fair, I don't have much spare time to do many of those things. What I can definitely recommend is get professional trainings where you don't have the skill set. So our very successful HR process, that's not from scratch from us, right? We did a coaching, we did 2 days training on it to then get the skill set of developing it further on our own based on our business. So that is always a recommendation, and that could be any channel. So it could be a specific book about it. It could be a specific podcast about it and so on. But try to identify yourself where you need knowledge. But also, listening to podcasts is a really nice thing. I like, which is not for entrepreneurship, but Fest and Flauschig in Germany is really nice, where you just get, you get inspiration sometimes. You for example, listening to your podcast now with me will probably inspire some people to rethink their processes, think about how they approach stuff or how to build up their startup. And that's very important to, not just live in your own bubble, but to get your, get there or where other basically some input to think about stuff. Where, for example, myself, it is more my family and my child, where my wife and child are they're also different to me as a person, of course. But then they they bring a lot of value in me rethinking things also in the company. So you just need your inspirational source, I guess, which could be different for anyone.
Tell us one thing about you that I wouldn't be able to find out online.
Maybe it's not online because it shouldn't be online. Let me think. I like gardening. I don't think that's online, but I like growing my own plants and cooking with the stuff I've grown there.
Oh, do you have a garden at home?
No, so sadly not. I have a balcony face to the north.
Yeah.
Really bad, but yeah, I'm trying to improve on that.
Now that you mentioned that you are dad, do you have any tips for the dad entrepreneurs out there? Something you've learned, something you know that has helped you to go through both, like the paternity and to manage both paternity and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think it's rather the decision to take. Let's say, for example, looking at the timing, which is a very important thing, it will never be a good time because you will always be with shitloads of work. You will always have your mind around your company because it's your baby. You're then maybe second baby, right? But think about it in a way that it doesn't matter at which timing you do it. You shouldn't wait for it because, I mean, that if you think of phases in a startup, you'll have your seed phase, Series A, Series B. When is the best time for it? You will always have challenges which are bigger than the ones before, so it'll never get better, actually. So we just said, well, then we can do it anyway. So it's more of that decision-taking process, and then try to keep a balance. And that's through communication. That's probably the only advice I can give, and you will find the models to handle it. But it'll never be probably a good timing.
Yep. Thank you for the advice. Do you have one last thing you'd like to share with the entrepreneurs of our audience? Where can they find you, your company? Are you hiring now? Are you apparently looking for funding? But do you have some messages for the potential investors listening to this podcast? So this is your time now to share whatever you want with our listeners.
All right. So as you mentioned at the beginning, we're actually in funding. Yes. Series A, we're raising a couple of millions. So if anyone is interested, always reach out through LinkedIn. Is very easy. Make sure you put a message on your inquiry. Otherwise, usually don't accept invites. And also, if anyone interested in sustainable solutions, visit Planet Sustainability. It'll be a big thing. You will meet many great people of the same mindset. That's always good. So if you want to reach out, I'm happy to, if you explain why, right? So always leave a short message.
I will leave the link to your LinkedIn profile and planetsustainability.de and Vilisto as well on the resources.
Perfect.
So, Christoph, thank you very much for your time today. I wish you all the best with your company, and keep on making this world a better place to live in. And thank you so much again for today. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Gilles. Bye-bye.
If you like this podcast, there are 2 things you can do that would mean the world to me. The first thing is to sign up for the podcast newsletter. That way you will be notified of the new episodes, but you will also get a summary of the learnings at the end of every season. Plus, for each episode, you will get the resources and the list of do's and don'ts that every guest shares with me. And finally, you will also get the opportunity to ask our future guests one question in advance. You can sign up for this newsletter on gtimpact.com. The second thing you can do to be super helpful is to recommend this podcast. For that, you can write a review on Apple Podcasts and share the podcast with your friends, other entrepreneurs, and people trying to build a sustainable future. That way, we can all learn together and work on a brighter future for us, our children, and our planet. Thank you very much and see you next week for the next episode. Have a nice day.